Welcome to the Buzzed Feed, wholly owned subsidiary of the Embellish podcast. Once a week, or every 2 weeks, or whenever I decide that it's time, I'll compile a list of news stories that I'd like to share with you that I think are interesting, specifically around the whiskey industry, and sometimes maybe not around the whiskey industry. If you don't think these articles are important, interesting, fascinating, whatever, you can absolutely feel free to shuffle on over to someone else's channel, because that's what I'm going to do here. We'll probably drink while we're doing so. It's not fully expected that the lucidity of these stories will be great. The further we get down the episode, and depending upon how many takes it takes me to record these, already ran through one of these, didn't go so well. If you want more information about the parent organization of Embellish Podcast, I hope you can find it yourself, because I'm not going to talk about that tonight at all. You know how to use Google. It's fine. All of the Buzzed Feed news that's fit to editorialize for January the 30th, 2022, going to be brought to you by, they are absolutely not a sponsor, brought to you by my own personal collection of whiskey. We're tonight going to drink Woodford Reserve Chocolate Malt Whisper, which is an okay whiskey with a terrible, terrible name. I think they found a unique way to be worse than Maker's Mark in naming. But they've created something here that if you just remove the word malt from it and you just call it Chocolate Whisper, you ever had a baby in a diaper, you know exactly what a Chocolate Whisper ends up looking like. Something that you're going to have to clean up later. So this is a hygiene problem as far as its name, but the whiskey is not too bad. All of the articles that we're going to talk about, they're going to be clipped apart, summarized, paraphrased. Sometimes I'm going to read portions of them word for word. If I remember to capture where I got the article from, I'll absolutely share that. If I don't remember, you're going to have to find it yourself. I will have at least the actual name of it. So the first story of the episode comes from the Lane Report. Japan recognizes bourbon and Tennessee whiskey as distinctive products of the United States. I'm pretty sure we've been recognizing Japanese whiskey and its standards for a while. Why is this just now a thing? But in the article, Japan recently became the 44th country to officially recognize bourbon and Tennessee whiskey as distinctive products to the United States, according to the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, DISCUS. Gotta love acronyms, especially when they actually make a name. You know, sometimes you wonder if they put their name together and they're like, oh, we got to change it around until we get an acronym that makes sense. Don't want to be like FBI, yeah, you can't do anything with that. The recognition ensures that only bourbon and Tennessee whiskey that are produced in the United States, according to the official U.S. standards, may be sold in Japan. Japan ranks as a top export market for American whiskeys, and this action will ensure the integrity of these popular spirit products in this critical market. Of course they did. They got their standards of identity, in 2021? We recognize them. If they don't recognize ours, maybe we stop recognizing theirs and we start making stuff that's called Japanese whiskey. But the bigger problem is that do the standards of Tennessee whiskey and bourbon, are they adhered to strongly enough by the TTB for this to really make a whole hell of a lot of difference? I think you'll find a lot of people that will probably disagree with that. But I'll kind of leave that there. Japan recognizes bourbon as bourbon. Congratulations. Did a thing that 43 other countries were already doing. From the Lane Report also, UFC star Dustin Poirier launches his own bourbon company. The former interim UFC lightweight champion has expanded his personal empire by launching Rare Stash Bourbon, and that is a hell of a name. Poirier's bourbon comes in a snazzy 750 milliliter bottle and retails for $100. And so now we're in the vein of celebrity whiskeys that are immediately hitting that $100 mark because they're affiliated with somebody's name. It is what it is. The Diamond, and I can only assume that that is Dustin Poirier's nickname, maybe? His fighting name? I don't know. I haven't followed UFC since Anderson Silva mattered. So the Diamond announced his latest business venture in a Twitter video saying, you know there's a legitimate brand if you announce it in a Twitter video. What's up, man? What if I'm a woman? What's up, man? I just wanted to say thank you to all my fans across the world. Thank you for the love and support over the years. I'm excited to introduce you guys to my rare stash. Check it out. The bottle is full of celebrations, congratulations, and second chances, and amazing bourbon. You are invited to join me in enjoying my first batch of rare stash. Number one, that is a terrible name. Start over again, guy. That's not the move. Your marketing strategy was Twitter. You're not really necessarily known for whiskey to begin with, or at least as far as I know. And I know a little bit about whiskey and less about UFC. But if you're that big a guy when it comes to whiskey, or that big of a name, then I probably would have heard it by now. If you haven't purchased this, before you do it, Matt over at ADHD Whiskey did a review of this recently. Go watch it. Super entertaining, like all of his videos always are, but you'll learn everything that you need to know about rare stash bourbon and what it is. There are a lot of whiskey brands that are aligned to celebrities already. Metallica and Blackened, Slipknot and Cedar Ridge, I think, Guar and Catoctin, right? These are all musicians. And then there's Scottie Pippen did a whiskey. I think Drake did a whiskey. There's a lot of people out there. Hell, even Mike Rowe did one, and I bought that because I like Mike Rowe, and I don't know if it's good or not. But usually, there's some degree of affiliation to whiskey that pre-exists. I mean, Metallica, I think we've all seen all of the stills and images of them just straight up pounding Jack Daniels whenever they would tour. I think the same is probably the case for Slipknot. Same probably for Guar. Like, you're going to see these things that regularly happen. To me, this feels like an attempt to cash in on a similar type of hype that Conor McGregor already did with Proper 12. But it also feels like Conor McGregor did a hell of a lot of a better job of marketing whatever he was trying to sell than this. Name's not great. From what I understand, the whiskey's not great. We'll see what happens. Some more hygiene whiskey. Bad hygiene whiskey. Story number 3 from the Whiskey Wash. And if you don't go and read the Whiskey Wash, you absolutely should. There's always great stuff here. But Yellowstone Bourbon debuts a landmark edition bottle celebrating its 150th anniversary. The Yellowstone Bourbon brand has a big milestone coming up. Its 150th anniversary, and Limestone Branch will be celebrating that by launching Yellowstone Select Landmark Edition Bottle Series. 6 different bottles. They're going to have Lower Yellowstone, Old Faithful, Grand Prismatic Spring, Minerva Terrace, Roosevelt Arch, all of this. Stephen Beam and his brother Paul Beam opened Limestone Branch Distillery in 2011. With a history of distilling, both sides of their family, both Beam and Dance, the brothers are 7th generation distillers. In 2015, they brought the Yellowstone brand back to the family. Is there a problem reconciling that Yellowstone is celebrating 150th anniversary at Whiskey Company? Is that a real thing? Maybe if we're viewing it like you're going to celebrate the birthday of a family member that was changed into a zombie or a vampire, and they are now the undead, or they died and came back from, like, how does that work? How do you celebrate 150 years and you haven't always been in production, when you've been a resurrected brand? That's where my problem comes in here. The articles, maybe I should caveat that. I'm not saying anything about the articles so far. There's going to be a couple later on that we may have a talk about. But so far, I'm not talking about the articles. I'm talking about the idea behind it. Rare stash bourbon, not so great. This celebrating your 150th anniversary, haven't really been distilling for 150 years, maybe a problem. Japan recognizing something that they should have already been doing. Why are we patting you on the back for that, right? All right, rolling to the next one. And like I said, we're going to try to keep this under 15 minutes, see what happens. The Whiskey Wash again, the new Bardstown collection featuring 5 distilleries collaborative bourbon bottles. So, if you haven't seen this, this already happened. This was in the middle of January. You had a group of 5 distilleries that put out unique offerings, and it's sort of like a package deal. And they had almost like an amazing race or a scavenger hunt for whiskey. And so on Thursday, January the 13th, and Friday, January the 14th, at a staggered offering, each distillery put out their collaborative series where they all work together. For the bourbon capital of the world, we're all going to put together this offering, which is super interesting to me. Love collaboration. Collaboration has been essential to the whiskey industry. It's the backbone of it. You think about Heaven Hill when they lost their barrels and people chipped in to, distill and rack and store whiskey for them so they could continue moving forward. Um, you hear about people helping each other out on a regular basis. My problem is not the collaborative attempt. My problem is how this is rolled out. I am a whiskey fan. I would have tried to find a way to make myself available, pick up at least one of these offerings. But whenever you say, hey, it's going to be 10 a.m. on a Thursday, 1 p.m. on a Thursday, 4 p.m. on a Thursday, then 10 a.m. on a Friday, and 2 p.m. on a Friday. January the 13th and 14th. Do I have any vacation time left? Am I going to be able to get that off? I just took off for holidays. Putting these back to back to back to back, what are the odds that I can actually get to all 5 distilleries and get all 5 bottles available to me? And so, okay, maybe I pick one and I say, I'm going to go do just one of those distilleries. If your goal is to target people who live in the Bardstown, Louisville, Lexington triangle, you're probably going to be relatively okay because you might be able to sneak over and get something. And, they had special VIP things and, the distilleries themselves are doing some great stuff. My problem is that I think, and I could be wrong here, so maybe somebody will tell me in the comments or maybe they won't. Nobody will probably ever watch this. If Bardstown tourism is involved here and they said, hey, let's space these out a few hours apart, like, why not give each one of them their own entire day to do this? Because I saw the pictures from Bardstown Bourbon Company and people were straight lined up to pick up that offering. And so I'm going to go stand in line for the one that I want. But if they're separated out on days, I might be able to go get all of them. What realistically probably happened is that a bulk of these bottles ended up in the hands of either people who are going to resell them or people who are never going to drink them because they're just hobbyists or whatever. Whatever it is. Why not save something like this for whenever you have Kentucky Bourbon Festival? You have all of these bourbon fans in one location. You have this, wonderful offering, or some other, make an event out of it that's planned months in advance, and wow, we're going to have this collaborative release, and you can go to a single location where all of them are doing their VIP experiences or whatever else. There's ways to do this, and there was a 6 p.m. celebration at Scout and Scholar in Bardstown on Friday that the distilleries that were creating the Bardstown collection were potentially going to be there and hopefully going to do this again in the future. So that's where I land on this. Is if this happens again in the future, give us more than 30 days notice. I want to get there. I want one. I'm on the far end of the western portion of the state. It's a 3.5, 4 hour drive for me. But I'll find a way to be there if it can be somewhat reasonable. So that's the end of that one. I'm going to stop complaining. That sounded like a lot of sour grapes. Oh well, it is. From the Independent in the United Kingdom. The story here is climate crisis. Temperature changes could halt whiskey production in Scotland by 2080, report warns. Immediately have a problem with that title. Temperature changes could halt whiskey production. So could the law. So could wildfires. So lots of things could halt whiskey production. Maybe people just don't like whiskey by 2080. Could is a non-definitive term. Now, what they're after here is there's a study that was done by Glengoyne. Wasn't done by Glengoyne. They commissioned it. But researchers from the University of College London, UCL, found that heat, drought, stresses, climate crisis could impact water, barley, and yeast. And they're exactly right. Something that it relates similarly to me is Maker's Mark just announced this week that they were the largest B Corp distillery, I think, in the United States, maybe. And if you're not familiar with B Corps, you can go Google that. I'm not going to give you the entire of it. Basically, it's about being more sustainably concerned about how you get water, how you get farming ingredients, whatever. And regardless of what your political leaning is on climate change or whatever, if the entirety of your operation is dependent upon the environment, and whiskey is an environmental business, it pays to keep an eye on it, because from the beginning to end, if you do not have at least a understandable climate, an erratic climate is detrimental to these businesses because they don't know. You've got to be able to grow the things. You've got to be able to have the water, right? You got to grow the wheat. You got to have the water. You got to grow the trees. You got to be able to harvest the trees. You got to be able to season the wood. You've got to be able to have appropriate yeast cultures available to you in the climate to be able to ferment based off of, ambient temperatures and moisture and blah, blah, blah. And then once you do all of those things and you distill it, you're going to put it in a barrel. And a barrel has been made from a tree that was grown in a similar type of environment. And then you need temperature exchange. You need either a lot of time with very little temperature fluctuation or a short amount of time with a ton of temperature fluctuation. But if you cannot consistently understand what you're going to get, it's going to be detrimental to the entire industry that you're trying to work in. So this is a good thing that they're doing, but there's a little bit of Chicken Littling in that one and the next two articles. So these last three, they're going to be Chicken Little articles. And I have some problems with the way that they're constructed because they're talking about 2040, 2080, 2070, whatever. There's a ton of things that could happen, and people may not even care about whiskey by that time. So we'll roll into the next one, story number 6 from the Outdoor News, which, if you're getting whiskey news, you definitely want it to be from an outdoor magazine. But the article here is there is a shortage of white oak trees, and it is a truly American phenomenon. There's a high demand for white oak. That's always going to be the case because it's more expensive. It's a more dense wood. It's a more beautiful wood. It's not going to be what you're going to build a house out of. It's what you're going to build furniture out of. Whatever. But the problem is that as the need for, this is what the article, I'm paraphrasing here, a bunch of loggers and mills went out of business in the mid 2000s because of a lack of demand for white oak. And so if you think about, American whiskey was not a huge demand of white oak in the early 2000s into the mid 2000s. That's where whiskey was just starting to pick up, but nobody was necessarily just increasing tenfold their utilization. And most barrel products are going to be seasoned for 12 or maybe 18 months out on a lot before they're made into they're made into square staves, then they're made into the odd trapezoid, I don't know, whatever shape that it is that you would call a barrel stave that's then rounded and cut and fit and all of that. But a whole bunch of people went out of business, and so now there's a lack of people to go cut the trees down and then season them and then make them into barrels. Like that's just a problem. This isn't necessarily anything new, though. As certain logging specific types of wood would be considered a niche type market, and as people trendily move in and out of specific things like saying, oh, we really like hand cut logs for structural building. That just doesn't happen. We want everything to be cheaper and to be automated. And that's really great if you want a bunch of pine lumber or whatever. So, there's a shortage of barrels, partially because people can't harvest them fast enough. That one leads into the next one. So the next one is an article that's called "The Future of America's Bourbon Barrels Could Be in Danger." Don't remember where I got it from. Just go Google that title. You'll find it. You've already heard somebody talk about it because they're going to tell you, oh, there's not enough oak trees left in the United States to make bourbon barrels anymore. What are we ever going to do? Number one, this is about white oak, and white oak is not the only type of oak in the United States. It's just the preferred oak. And so there are other options, potentially, right? But the article goes on to talk about there's this white oak initiative where they did a study about sustainability of the American white oak and where it is. So there's no endangered white oak tree, anything. What we find is that there's about 100 million acres of forest. And in that, of the American oak trees, American white oak trees specifically, that are standing up, 75% of them are mature trees. Mature means they're ready to harvest. And so in the short term, there's not a concern over availability of barrels. The problem is that those 75% that are mature, if you harvested all of them today and then you put saplings back down on the ground, you're 40 years away from being able to reharvest that. And you usually want, from my limited understanding of tree husbandry, and that's really what it's called, the tree farming thing a dozen years ago, it's a thing. You would probably, if I'm managing 1,000 acres of hardwood, I would probably want 25% of that to be new growth, 25% to be in saplings, 25% to be in middle-aged trees, and 25% to be in mature trees. So that way I have a consistent farming effort going into play here. And that's not what the case is. Does that mean there's any concern? Well, number one, in the immediate term, absolutely no concern. In the mid-range term, some, and then long term, I still don't know that it's there, because you've got to maintain that the American consumer 40 years from now is still interested in whiskey. And you and I both know that American consumers are cyclical. I'm starting to see clothing trends that were really popular whenever I was 9 years old come back around again. So we're 30 years removed, and now some of that's coming back. So are we in a bourbon boom that then drops off and people, fly over to Armagnac or Cognac or American single malt whiskey, or even, God forbid, back to vodka, where new white oak barrels are no longer of a significant concern. And so those mature trees, there's just a ton of chicken littling that happened in these 3 articles, and they've been repeated on loop by a number of people. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Hope you enjoyed it. If you've made it all the way to the end, I super appreciate you for being here. You can subscribe to the channel. You're already here. If you want to know more about what I do, go watch the other videos. I'm not going to give you a ton about that. I'm available on a lot of platforms. We'll cut this down into a video that's somewhat palatable. You'll see me again sometime in the future. I don't know when that's going to be. Hope you enjoy it. You can leave comments. Tell me what you think about the articles. Hell, you can even send me a few articles for the future, and we'll see what happens. But until then, thanks for joining me.